The following presentation contains content that some individuals may find sensitive or distressing.
Well, dear guest, you are in for a treat this evening. It is very rare for more than one patron to approach the keepers, but that is exactly what we have here. You see how one carries the other? I assure you this is most unusual. Disorientation? Commonplace. Anger and denial? Well, that is most of it, if I'm being honest. Though, in truth, only few are bold or deranged enough to dare show that to the keepers. But well-dressed, blood-stained, thoroughly rendered apart, and calm as a windless lake. Simply outrageous. How painful that end must have been. I'd imagine it was unexpected. Those always make for the most delightful and satisfying stories, though. But what do you think? Any assumptions on how our patron ended up so? And what to make of this smaller, but no less blood-soaked soul that he carries? Dearest guest, apologies. I forgot that you cannot see them as I do. See the unending void of darkness that is their being? One is an unrepentant killer. The other, one who kills for convenience. How indeed will the mistress treat them, I wonder? Well, let us turn our attention to their words and listen to what this pair has to say for themselves.
Welcome, patrons. You're on the crossover, and how happy I am to see you.
Wait, what is this? My queen of endless eons, are you alright?
Why wouldn't I be? Are we not both bound for all time to this role we play? Am I not allowed to greet those who have travelled so far and so long to be with us?
No, not at all. You're always welcome to welcome those that we welcome.
Please, my beloved Infinity, leave some welcome for our guests. Apologies. He is normally much more composed. I can't imagine what has gotten into him. And how could I ignore our guests? Especially this handsome one here. You're all covered in blood, aren't you? And waiting so politely to tell me your story. What a good boy you are, and such excellent manners for a killer. How adorable.
Indeed. I do desire nothing more than to see you enjoying yourself and really embracing this duty of ours. I apologize for any offense that I... Hello? My unending... What is he doing?
What? Oh, he was cleaning himself. Such a proper little man he is. I could just eat him all up.
Not to disrupt all of this, have I to remind you that there are two of them standing there?
Are there really?
Of course you're aware. I'll just be over here, listening quietly. I'm looking forward to hearing their story.
Wonderful. I do hope you enjoy it. I know I will. Sorry, dear, to rush you, but Ori is impatient today. Begin soon, and don't bore me. I know you won't. Now tell me everything.
I watched as the wretch was pulled off his perch atop the wagon. A terrified shriek departed the lips as he was thrown, but the impact of his soft body against the hard-packed earth put an end to that. The beast of the woods and the shackled black steed ignored its cries, its final breathless plea otherwise unheard in the darkness. Well, outside of his murderer, of course, but his focus was solely on crushing the poor thing's windpipe, so I don't think he really counts now, does he? My eyes widened, adjusting to the deepening gloom that the sparse moonlight hid amongst the trees of the forest. It had been far brighter in the previous hour, when I first laid eyes on this murderous fiend. He was completely unaware of me. I was one with the night, the perfect predator. I was the hunter, the soundless, the unseen.
Of course you were. What a perfect little murderous monster you are.
Dearest?
What?
Excellent start, don't you think?
I thought as much. Continue, dear.
I perched atop a branch overhead, pondering what he was planning as he crept through the trees below. Watching him skulk and hide, then nervously jump up at the slightest sound. Over and over he repeated this, even without knowing I was an audience to the deed. It was endlessly amusing, and I could not tear my gaze away. My interest piqued. I was invested in this story, as they say. He struggled a bit to pull the corpse beyond the dusty road. I stifled a yawn. Dragging a body through the bush is no small task. But it is even more difficult to remain interested in events when one must watch a weakling struggle to finish what he started. I, of course, would have no such problem. I persevered through it all, though. After all, I had been waiting here for a murderer, and that is exactly what I found. Finally, the blackness of thick trees swallowed them whole. Now he was obscured from view, but I waited and waited until after countless minutes later, he emerged. Clever thing. Wearing the dead man's clothing? What a curious game you're playing. He took a moment to dust off the jacket, a choice I wholeheartedly agreed with. A bit of violence is, after all, no excuse to be filthy. Besides, a good cleansing is just the thing to follow up a murder. At least that is always how I follow up my kills. With a nice, luxurious cleaning. Sorry, I am prone to being distracted. Back to the scene, mistress. He was rummaging through the inside of the black carriage, ignoring the tethered steed pulling against the harness. The smell of death is a little harder to wash off than most think, and animals are very sensitive to such things. Rarely do people think of that. It's very inconsiderate of them. Not that he cared what the horse did. He was very focused, and soon he had found something. Whether that discovery was by chance or design, I cannot say. However, since the meeting on the road was anything but a chance passing, I have to assume it was the latter. Paper? A letter, perhaps? He danced about as he held the paper to his eyes, choosing to struggle and strain in the moonlight rather than read by the light of the lantern suspended over the horse's head. I could hear him snickering as he folded the paper and put it inside of his coat. He'd been searching for it. I knew this was no random attack. He wandered away again, back into the dark. It was the perfect opportunity for me to make my move. Down and through the shadows I went, quick, deadly, and soundless. I'd done it! Before he returned, I was safely hidden within the haphazardly arranged blankets and crates that littered the back of the wagon. A lesser thing would have been wise to stay further away, but I am no lesser thing. Besides, I no longer cared to resist my curiosity. Not that I was really trying too hard to fight it prior. The wagon creaked and swayed under our combined weight as he climbed onto the bench seat, took the reins, and forced the horse forward. I was finally close enough to smell him myself, and it did not disappoint. It was the sickly sweet smell of death and the heady aroma of adrenaline mixed with fear. I've always found that particular mix intoxicating. I wanted a taste. That curiosity plagued me still, but I suppressed it. I resisted the urge to leave my hiding place and engage in a bit of murder myself. I would wait. Delayed gratification is not a discipline I've ever cultivated, but the allure of new scents to smell and murders to witness was enough to hold my instincts in check. At least for a time. Repeatedly, he fussed with his clothing and checked the small golden pocket watch that sat within the coat. It was funny to watch him squirm, so uncomfortable with death and having inflicted it. The sound of hooves against hard earth and the gentle sway of the wagon was soothing. With little else to do, I drifted off to sleep.
Oh, you poor thing. How awful to have to endure such waiting, but you are a good boy. I am so very proud of you. Oregon, tell him what a good little one he is.
I do not think that is appropriate. We must, after all, be impartial to all those involved.
Don't listen to mean old Oregon. He spends his days speaking to the dead. A dull lot, to be sure, and not much for conversation. You have done wonderfully, and I think you are well on your way to earning a very, very special treat.
I must admit that I admire the dedication and utter devotion of Oregon to his duty and eternal charge. I doubt any other god, goddesses, mortal, or madman would be so willing to so casually incur Aerith's displeasure. Thankfully, it is not as if he must stay with her for an eternity or anything like that. I am sure it will work out well for him in the long term. Yes, back to our patrons, of course. Talkative that one is, isn't it? And so casual in his revelations to her, even to the point of boasting about his vile desires. Very unwise. I wonder, though, what game is our keepers playing at? Violence, rage, and unrelenting anger are her tools. But kindness and encouragement? What is this? Unexpected, most unexpected. I dare say this is even more terrifying to face her unbridled rage that makes the blood run cold. But at least then you know where things stand. This is much worse, and honestly, far more interesting. Let us return to the tale. Listen to how it all ends.
At the stroke of midnight, we arrived. I recognized this estate, having been here before. Even with that familiarity, I was taken aback by the old manor and its grounds. High walls to keep out monsters. Well, save me, of course. I had crossed over them more times than I can count. The ornate gate of iron did little to block my path either, for the record. The old place was always a sight, its looming peaks and sunken shoulders crowded over top of any who dared approach. These old Gothic-style homes are just magnets for tragedy, are they not? I wonder why that is. The murderer took a moment and studied the copper plate above the gate. Its patina now a milky white green. I heard him mouth the name William under his breath. William? It has been a while since I've heard that name. I remember the old master of the house quite well. I almost miss him. At least I might, if I was capable of such a thing. I waited a moment as the murderer negotiated his way past the rusted and neglected iron gate. Again, I slipped from my place unseen, and in a heartbeat was over the wall and amidst the sheltering cover of my favorite tree on the manor grounds. I was already nestled in its tall branches by the time he began to drive the horse and carriage up the path. The horse led the way while he studied the letter once more. The darkness embraced me as I crept from the tree and up along the hedgerow that flanked the path. I could see that the butler's window was open, as always. His quarters provided an easy way for me to enter and depart when he was alive, and now it had been long abandoned and neglected. From inside, I watched him grab the suitcase of his victim, taking from him his life, his name, his coat, and now his belongings. Murder and theft, fully completed. Admirable, really.
My once and always, I appreciate your enjoyment of this, but it seems this matter is relatively plain on its face. Can we not disperse the judgment now? The guilt is clear, and the punishment is also well established for murderers like our patron.
Do you want to finish your story? Come now, tell me the truth. What is that? You have more to share? You don't want me to be bored or deny me the joy of hearing your story? Well, that is a wonderful kindness you honor me with. Perhaps I will keep you around the crossover. It would be nice to have at least one being in here that really cared about what I wanted.
Really? Very well. Patron, I apologize. If the mistress wishes to hear more, I shall not interfere with her desires.
What? Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Are you finished? I would like to be so as well. After all, I am starving. Now, where was I? Oh, yes. The gleam of malevolence hung in his eye as he lurched toward the aged wooden door. The clouds parted in response, and the placid moon cast shadows across the yard. He paused, set his face in manner before rapping the iron door knocker 3 times. How busy his mind must have been in the moments before the glow of the candle emerged. I am curious if he noticed that he still tugged and straightened the edges of his coat. I barely even move after I've killed. After all, it's in those moments, blood soaking my face, that I am the most calm, most happy. The wind swept around the manor's stones and toward his coat, but the menace of his gaze was unaffected. His mental state transcended the echoing whine created by the wind. It had no effect on him, and the wind ran away across the manor's grounds. The manor was not so easily ignored, the ominous moonlight revealing the old house's evil intent. Creeping vines scaling the walls like slithering snakes curling up and around the entryway. Their ends reached for the threat at the door, poised to strike him dead if they had the power. Then the door opened. The end had begun.
Uncle Thomas, I presume?
A bit young to receive the guests of the house, aren't you? What's your name and place, young lady?
I am 12, nearly 13. Mother says I'm just about old enough to begin receiving suitors. I'm Elizabeth, eldest daughter of the house.
Old enough to know better than to arrive in your bedclothes to greet guests, regardless the hour. Old enough you should have summoned the man of the house instead. You can never be too careful when those unknown to you come knocking.
I would have laughed were I capable. All that primping and preening, and he just goes and nearly ruins everything. Unknown indeed. He might as well have turned up in his blood-stained clothes, idiot.
The rest of the house sleeps. Shall I wake them for you?
You should have gotten your mother to receive me when I first arrived. The point's moot now, child. Your courtesy in showing me to my room will suffice.
I was only a few paces behind them, my steps falling silent in the deafening echoes of the murderers. The manor's darkness eagerly wrapped me in shadows. How easy it would have been to strike them both down. They were oblivious.
I am pleased to make your acquaintance. Sorry, I didn't want you to wait as the night grows cold and...
I've had a long journey. There will be plenty of opportunities to become properly acquainted with you and the others in the morning.
Very well, Uncle Thomas.
In that moment, as the door closed and a tiny waif of a girl tiptoed down the hall, the most unusual feeling crept over me. It was most unpleasant. I felt the uncontrollable urge to warn the girl of the danger that lurked alongside her in the manor. How revolting pity is. It's not as if I possessed the capability to warn her anyways. It seemed my night of watching was at an end. Naturally, I made my way out of the house, climbing out of another open window, but this time on the 2nd floor. A simple jump across the gap between ledge and limb, and I found myself in one of the many elderly trees, forever locked in an embrace with the stone wall that held the edge of the house up. From there, I decided to prowl about in the family cemetery. I drifted for hours between mausoleums and weathered gravestones, taking time to stretch out upon each one as the fog covered the ground. I napped upon the markers of my old friends. I always knew I'd outlive them, something they never realized. My desire for nostalgia satisfied, and the air turning a bit colder than I enjoy, it was time to return inside. The house groaned and its bones creaked in the relentless wind. I prowled through the hallways and rooms unseen, unheard. From room to room I walked, counting the living souls, 8 in total, each helpless, each just lying there as if there weren't now 2 killers in their midst. It wasn't just us, though. There were the non-living creeping about as well. One's body was kept cool in the hard-packed earth of the dank basement below. 4 others awaited me as I walked along the hallway leading up to the master of the manor's chambers. The specters' human-like silhouettes, faint in the moonlight and invisible to the living, floated over the creaking floorboards. Bastards! They were silent, even more than I was. I considered swiping at them as they passed over me, but I didn't want to waste the energy. As they floated above and then down the hall, I felt the chill of the grave, raising the hair along my spine. I'm sure they noticed me. Their feigning ignorance and their shallow glances did little to hide their disrespect. I didn't care, not really anyways. Besides, the door to the murderer's room had found its way open. It was an invitation, and I took it, pushing myself through the open crack. The hearth, burning low in the corner, still offered a warmth that I found delightful. I nearly found myself purring like some lazy house cat. Could you imagine that? I'd rather die. Where was I? Oh, that's right. The letter. How careless. He just left it out and laid open across the desk in the corner. Of course I read it. Don't be silly.
Dearest Thomas, I desperately hope this letter finds its way to you. We have never acquainted, nor you, with my 6 children, but I must inform you of the untimely demise of my husband, your brother, William. He has fallen to fever in recent days, leaving you the only surviving member of your immediate family. By the wishes of your late father, they have bequeathed the estate to you. Please come at once, Jane.
Sly bastard. Clearly the roadside encounter wasn't by chance. Imagine the good fortune to stumble across a man whose life you can steal and become master of the manor. Could I let one with such a diabolical scheme evade punishment? Certainly not. A ghastly murder should not prove so fortuitous for such a poor impersonator and crude butcher. I watched as he slept. My blood boiled, and I cursed him with my eyes. What was I to do? Again, that sickly feeling came over me. I felt something for this poor family. Would I caution these innocents if I could? A pointless distraction, as the pathway to do so remained unknown. I contented myself with continuing the curse of my unblinking gaze. Daylight peered through the windows, and the sounds of children pacing through the halls roused me from my slumber. I remained in the shadows, spying unseen on the target of my ire and keeping away from the children. The murderer laughed to himself as he dressed in a fresh outfit from the stolen chest. He strutted around, growing more and more comfortable in the deceased Uncle Thomas's clothes, making a mockery of the oblivious family. The scent of his undeserved morning meal reached me as he exited the room, and I followed behind. The ineloquent belching and rambling of this false uncle drowned out the muttering chatter among the family. Through the meal, he revealed his ill-gotten good fortune. Any nerves or conscious thought toward the murdered man whose clothes he wore had faded. He no longer gave his new identity, or the poor soul he ripped it from, a second thought. He gorged himself. Clearly, he felt he had not taken enough. He wanted more. So complete was his gluttony that he only noticed that his family was missing when he had consumed every last morsel of food provided, and he had no one to bring him more. If I'm being honest, I was surprised that he even bothered to determine where they'd gone, much less follow after them. He was deliberate in his descent, having realized that they had retreated below to view the deceased. For him, it was just another body, his supposed late brother. For them, it was William, beloved, and now gone. He feigned sorrow when he first laid eyes on the deceased, looking away as if he was overtaken. In this gloom, the family couldn't possibly have seen his face, but the darkness did little to hide him from my eyes. His contempt for the corpse was clear.
So many years have passed. I hardly recognize him.
I was embarrassed to share the title of killer with this one, as I saw his barely concealed smile, the sound of his snickering tainting the lie he had just told.
My memory fails me. How long has it been since I've seen my dear brother?
Really? Just unbelievable. What a deft attempt to gain information. He must have assumed the family were as coherent as the waxy-skinned corpse to whom he referred.
30 years. William never forgot the parting.
I could see her face, just as plain as his. I could see the sorrow in her eyes as she looked upon her late husband, then over her children. The two boys had set their faces into stoic masks, any emotion bound behind it. The girls, all four, dressed in black mourning attire. Their faces matched the emotions of their mother.
Now, Jane. I'm sure William was a good man, father and husband.
The very sun itself could have exploded into existence within the crypt, and this idiot would still find himself in the dark.
That he was.
He caressed her cheek, wiping away a single tear. Gods, she was brilliant. Never a flicker or crack while he looked at her, but once his back was turned, her face turned as dark as my soul. I was very impressed. Since I could do little else, I simply accepted the warmth this little scene filled me with, and continued on. Don't let me forget the children. They were excellent as well. From eldest Elizabeth to the youngest of the brood. My only sorrow is that the performance seems lost on this moron. They could have scrawled their feelings across their faces in coal dust, and I doubt he would have realized that they were words.
Come along, children. Today will be a celebration of life. William would have wished it that way. I trust we've prepared a plot in the cemetery.
Yes, next to your father and mother.
Splendid!
I wonder if specters can appreciate the nuance of such things. The four of them had been present and were expectedly silent on the subject before they vanished, drifting away into the walls. If the most recent among them noticed or cared, I would have expected him to make that known, especially as the murderer's mind and gaze shifted from deception to lust, fixating on the widow's body. He couldn't help from nodding his approval while his lip curled in the corner, his eyes never moving off of her while she ascended the stairs. The dirty bastard didn't even have the character to wait until he was out of sight of her husband's corpse. I wonder if his lecherous eyes would have remained if he could have seen his dearly departed brother's ghostly visage. A shame, really. I would have loved to see that.
As would I. What? I walk with the dead. They're not as boring as you see them, dearest. There is some part of them that lingers on for a long time after they pass by us, and that part speaks, not loudly, but enough to be heard by those who wish to listen. And who comforts those in grief? I do. And to use the deepest of sorrows to fulfill petty ambitions or foul desires is an offense that makes my essence burn every bit as brightly as yours, dearest and eternal bound. I would see this one suffer greatly, and I do enjoy watching you work.
I have never doubted you in your love, devotion, and care.
Apologies for my earlier interruptions. I will have you know that I think you have done wonderfully with this tale, and I am very eager to reach its well-deserved end.
I always knew you liked me. How could you not? My charm is irresistible. Now where was I? Oh, yes. Hours passed as this newly formed family went through the expected routine. I viewed it all from my place upon the second-floor windowsill. I couldn't hear the words spoken, but even at this distance I could see his overacting and the subtle, splendid performance of the family. I didn't see all of it, of course. It was nap time for me, and I figured sacrificing that bit of the story was worth it. I needed to ensure I was wide awake for the finale, after all. I awoke to the smell of the second, even more lavish and indulgent banquet that had been laid out for the murderer. Such glorious aromas, the bitter tendril of fine wine breathing into the air, the steam of freshly baked bread, freshly cut fruits chilling in cool cream, roasted meat sizzled on its platter. The smells made me ravenous with hunger, but I would not risk my view of this dinner. I satiated my hunger on the dream of what was soon to come. It was all I really needed. The sustenance of the mortals was really just an indulgence for me. I remained invisible among the shadows, watching the murderer's gluttonous frenzy, delighting in his ignorance and tasting the very first drops of what was to come.
Uncle Thomas, beloved uncle, if I dare to assume such? There is one last thing we must do to honor my father's wishes, Uncle Thomas.
Of course, child. I look forward to the love we will all share.
I would tear off my skin to not have heard that. It was disgusting when it was the widow, but now this child... revolting, vile, worthy of a special place in damnation.
He had wished we would open this heirloom together at midnight, following his burial.
I could see the murderer's eyes widen as young Elizabeth pulled out the dusty and sealed box from under the table. The lust in his eyes was far deeper and more passionate than either of his perverse leers towards the manor's matriarch and eldest daughter had been.
Of course, my child.
Slurred speech? I hadn't thought he drank that much.
Midnight precisely. With the whole family gathered around.
If the widow had felt his hand on her inner thigh, she didn't show it. I, on the other hand, could feel the skin on my face curl back around my lips, my fangs emerging. I had waited so long to taste his blood. It was all I could do to resume my form and choke down my desires. Midnight approached, and not a moment too soon. I was on the verge of becoming bored, and that could not be tolerated. The sound of the family walking through the halls drew my attention, and I crept to the edge of the doorway. They walked by in a solemn procession, each bearing a candle and calling out,
Thomas!
Uncle Thomas!
Come now!
Come down to the kitchen.
We're
waiting for you.
I waited until I heard the groan of the murderer's bed and the sound of the boot heels in the hallway. I almost wanted to make a noise, to let him see me, so that he knew I was watching. But rules are rules. When I arrived, he already sat at the head of the table, the family standing round him, near but just out of his view, just out of his space. Again, I wished for the blessing of laughter as I watched the widow place the large wooden box on top of his filthy, dirty, blood-stained hands, and then blew the gathered dust off its lid and into his face. He coughed, and for a moment, what was inside slipped to the surface. His face contorted. The facade of anticipation fell, revealing violence, distaste, and treachery. They call me monster, but that title fits him far better. I loathed him. His end could not come quickly enough. He was so close to his prize that he quickly regained himself. I could see into his heart, though, and it cried out for retribution, delighting in the punishment he had planned for the widow.
Here's the key to...
Such delays will not be tolerated in my house. I am, after all, the master of the manor. You will be wise to begin learning your lessons and teaching them theirs.
Everything in my shriveled and blackened soul cried out to leap on him from the shadows, to rend and tear and mutilate. But I respect my mistress's wishes, and I was sent only to watch and then deliver. As he pushed the key in and opened the box, I felt my heart begin to race. The time was at hand. He reached in, eyes fixated on the assembled wealth, and with a disappointed sigh, withdrew the neatly folded letter that sat atop it all, the final gasp of his pathetic charade. He allowed the widow to move the heavy chest to the table, but kept one hand firmly grasping it. The other opened the paper.
Those are the last wishes of my husband, the children's father, and your brother, William.
I can see that. Be thankful both my hands are occupied, or that would have been your first lesson in how to respect your betters.
My eyes and smile opened wide. I no longer worried about hiding. It was time. He had begun to read it.
Thomas, my brother, over the years that have passed since your abrupt departure, I found time to properly and respectfully mourn the death of mother and father. I hope you visited their plots in the cemetery and paid your respects, as I have done so each day. Our sister Sarah succumbed to death 22 years later, and bore no children for complications from the same poison you used to kill our parents. I still recollect the facade your face bore when you returned to see that Sarah and I had survived your murderous plot against us all. You were wise to flee. Unfortunately, if I have passed, you are still heir to the manor until the day you breathe your last breath. I have taken the family's collection of jewels and created the decorative handles for the blades my family now grasps before you. I have instructed each of them to give you a dagger in remembrance of our mother and father, Sarah and myself. In the likely event of your death, the estate will belong to those you see before you. May you burn in hell for all eternity. William.
The widow's blade struck first, and with deliberate purpose. A thrust to the mid-spine disables the legs, but allows the victim to scream without disruption.
You bitch!
A narrow blade plunged into each shoulder blade at just the right height, say where a pair of 9-year-old girls could easily reach on a sitting victim, will disable the use of the arms, pinning them at the sides.
Impotent to raise them in defense or anger.
Damn you all! Please! Please stop! I'm sorry! I lied! Please believe me! I'm not your uncle! Please! I killed him! I killed your uncle! Why are you laughing? Isn't that what you wanted to do yourself? I did it for you. No. I beg you. Please don't hurt me anymore. Don't kill me. I'm not him. I'm no one. A greedy worm. Please, I'm not here.
Poor stranger. We've known all along.
She told us. We were promised our vengeance, and no one denies what the mistress has given. Oh, no, don't cry, dear. Be happy. I have taught you a lesson. Rejoice.
His blood pooled around his hands and feet, refreshed every so often until his heart finally beat its last. I dove into it, let it dance on my tongue, paint my face. Oh, I had waited so long. I relished it, the warmth and the sorrow that flavored it in those final moments. The specters watched. I will never get over them and wonder what, if anything, they feel. Soon the blood began to congeal. The family retired to the crypt to mourn in earnest this time, and I departed. My delay was meaningless, of course. I had the scent of the murderer's soul. He could not escape me. The wind howled and the house groaned out in triumph as I shifted form. My shriek pierced the wind as I flew off into the night and beyond to the Skurg.
Excellent story, my precious one. Here, let me give you a cuddle. You deserve it.
Ooh, yes.
Why are you holding that cat? How is it here, and why were you talking to it the whole time I sat here, and why couldn't I say anything?
Silly Rich. Why would I need to hear your lies and falsehoods when my handsome boy Goliath was there to watch everything? Yes, you did, my big little monster. You are my favorite, and I missed you. Yes, I did.
Oh, I see you're very confused. Even more so than when you found yourself arriving here in the crossover. Let me fill in a few gaps. That cat is actually one of the goddess's oldest servants, a demon spawned from the depths of the well of eternal suffering, an Ugliovex, a watcher. She calls him Goliath for short. It's a bit demeaning if you ask me.
This is an outrage. Can't take the word of that stupid, mangy...
Watch your tongue, wretch. I yearn to tear it from your head.
No!
Please don't start embarrassing yourself now. It's unbecoming. I assure you that your trial and judgment are most fair, even if I am a bit biased towards the witness against you. As the widow said, I granted her vengeance. I promised her retribution. I sent my dear boy Goliath to watch for the very man you murdered. You see, in stealing his life, you stole their vengeance, and I cannot allow such a transgression. Maybe, if your involvement had actually been a coincidence, I could have contented myself with you suffering the torments of the damned, but you knew exactly who he was, and what he had done. I am done with this thing. I apologize, my love. I may have cheated a bit, and watched a small preview of these events. I hadn't meant to take your job from you. I know how much you love it. Allow me to make it up to you. I stole your welcome, and to make it fair, I'll let you be the final word and decision. Besides, I do need to tend to Goliath. He deserves a treat after all, and he is so very hungry. I must see him fed.
No. Allow me to take care of that. After all, I am very happy to see you happy. And let's not forget that Goliath was a very good boy.
You have been judged and found guilty, worthy of damnation's infinite in age and suffering. I condemn you not to eternity, but to oblivion. You denied the family's vengeance, left their souls hungering for what the mistress promised. So your penance shall be to sate another's hunger. The Ugliovex shall feast upon your soul. You will find no place in the beyond, only what horrors are housed in the endless void that is the demon's stomach. Begone from this existence.
Goliath, time for your treats.
A fitting end indeed. Wouldn't you agree, dear guest? When did you begin to suspect that something was a bit different in this tale? No doubt you had that furry little twist all figured out before the end. Does it make you think twice about all the eyes that are upon you? Those of the living, the dead, the small lives that are so often ignored? Never lose sight of what you are doing. After all, you never know who or what is watching you. You may think what you have done in the dark is unknown, but it is all just another part of your story. Who knows? Someday it may be you telling the next fable from the forgotten.
Master of the Manor, written by Niji Quotev, directed by Josh McGinnis and Jason Merwin, production by Dungeon Studios, edited by Michael Riley, starring Tyree Mapson as Alabaster the host, Hannah Stoltz as Aerith, Tim Roberts as Oregon, Michael Riley as Goliath, The Upright Man as Uncle Thomas, Sarah Crawford as Elizabeth, Sophia Stefanovich as Jane, William Lanham as William. Background music scored by Eric Rettig of ASCII Orchestral Ambient Music. Until next time, away with you!